Welcome to the Real Life Podcasts with your hosts, leadership and personal growth author and speaker John C. Donahue and licensed psychotherapist Lou Carfisi. The Real Life Podcast is your weekly dose of motivation, encouragement, and direction to help you live your life at the highest level.
Well, hello, everybody. We would like to welcome you to the Real Life Podcast. We thank you for your time that you take to watch and listen. And we would encourage you to come to Blab and check this out. First of all, Lou, why don't you take a couple of moments to introduce yourself and how do you play into this Real Life Podcast?
Well, my name is Lou Carfisi, and I am a licensed psychotherapist in the state of Georgia. I have a practice here in Georgia, and I'm also going and moving out and on to bigger and better things in terms of a wider audience. And we help people at my practice with common everyday problems as well as very serious ones, marriage counseling, victims of abuse, and a lot of just pretty normal relationship things that go on.
Excellent. How can people find you over at Life Care?
They can go to lifecarecounseling.net. Lifecare Counseling in one word.net, and you get to see some of the posts and some of the articles there on the website and how to contact me if you'd like to come in for a visit or you'd like to schedule maybe an online session.
Excellent. And my name's John, and I come to you from johncdonahue.com. Lou is an amazing counselor. What I do is a little different. I don't do counseling. But I do leadership, coaching, life coaching. I write a lot about leadership, personal development. Organization is one of the things I spend a lot of time doing, and just coming up with different ways to think creatively about challenges that you face, different ways that we can relate better to each other. And you can find me over at johncdonahue.com. I'm all over Facebook and Twitter at John C. Donahue. And speaking of that, Lou, why don't you tell everybody how they can contact us here at Real Life Podcast?
Well, if you're enjoying the video or you have questions on this Blab session, please send us an email at questions@reallifepodcast.com. And we take your questions seriously, and we will do our best to try to answer them.
Yep. You can also find us over on Facebook at facebook.com/reallifepodcast. And if you're on Twitter, we're over there on the Twitter as well at Real Life Cast. I always have to think about that one because that one's a little different. And obviously, we want to invite you to come over to reallifepodcast.com, sign up for our newsletter. As we're recording this, we had our very first newsletter go out this past weekend. That was pretty awesome. And we would love for you to sign up for that. We have special articles that Lou and I both write for that we don't put on the blog. English is my second language. We have articles that we both write that we do not post on the blog. And that's something that we do there. Plus, it's a way you guys can keep up with what we're putting out as far as podcasts. And the weekly blabs are there too, plus all sorts of good stuff. Totally free. We would love to have you over there and sign up for our newsletter. But today, victims, being a victim, the victimization of America is headlines that I always read. What does it really mean to be a victim? When we use that term victim, Lou, what does that mean?
Well, it's a tough word because first of all, it's very serious, and second of all, it can be meaning almost anything. What it means to be a victim is either a state of mind or a result of some bad things that may have happened to you in your life.
Right.
But in either case, it's how does it affect us, and are we a victim?
Right.
The things that we need to look at from this perspective are what exactly, if we think that we're a victim, what kind of a victim are we? And why were we victimized? Were we victimized by circumstances? Circumstances. How can somebody be victimized by a circumstance, John?
Oh my goodness. You had a great example of if you were a major league pitcher and you got your arm broken you're a victim of that circumstance. You can't do what you're hired to do. You were victimized by a circumstance or crime. So you can't do your job. You're a victim of that circumstance. A car wreck could be another example. You can't work because you're a victim of a car wreck. That's a good circumstance.
And other things can happen. You could be born into a family, and your parents, could be killed in a car accident or not be there, and here you are, a little kid or a baby, left without parents. That's a circumstance.
Right.
It's not a happy one.
Right.
It's a circumstance.
Right. There's a lot of kids who are out there like me. I'm a product of a divorce. My parents divorced when I was 17, 18. And so that has effects. I could be a victim of divorce if I chose to let it be like that. And, I know I did. For a long time, it did affect me until I really had to come to terms with it. All right. So, Lou, what is another way that people can be victimized?
Well, we said circumstances.
Right.
The next one on the list is bad parenting. Now, this subject alone, we could sit here and talk for hours on, but we won't. But bad parenting leaves a mark on kids, and that mark that stays there from the time it's happening to the time you're 40 years old. It's going to happen. It's going to keep on happening in your life. That the parents who brought you up with all the best intentions and love and all of those good things have made mistakes. And when I say bad parenting, it can mean abusive parents. It could mean just bad people necessarily, or it can mean just I made some mistakes when I was bringing you up, and I did too much yelling at you. I didn't encourage you enough. Can you relate to that?
Yeah, I think I can. My dad and I have had a very strange relationship the entire time I was a kid. He was one of those parents who, granted, because we had to, he worked a lot. He was gone a lot. And then as I grew up, he and I never had a really great relationship. And we just kind of grew apart. And over the years, it's just been one of those bones of contention for both of us. We don't know. I don't know exactly what I could do different. We just don't get along. It's just like he got me to a certain age, and then he flipped the switch. And he's had a couple of other kids since my parents' divorce. He got remarried, and it's the same thing with them. They get to a certain age, and then he's kind of done. And I'm not blaming him necessarily, but that's a great example to me in my life of parenting that is just one of those weird. I'm not saying that my dad's got issues. Maybe I'm the one with the issues, but that's one of those things that I struggle with for a long time. Right. You know that better probably than anybody.
Yeah, to some extent, we've all been victimized by bad parenting, and does that mean that we remain victimized for the rest of our lives? No, it doesn't.
No.
So we're going to get to that a little later on, and how to make sure that you get past these things.
Right. What about children who abuse their parents?
Well, what about it? It's a horrible thing, and it happens, especially with elderly parents.
Right.
Or you could be in a circumstance where you have maybe a 16, 17-year-old child, and he or she is big, and they can hit, and they can hurt you.
Right.
This is traumatic for the adult, but there's a reason the person's doing that. And I know I'm not saying it's you. Okay. I don't know the circumstances for these things, but I can tell you that this is alive and well. I recently had a procedure done in the hospital, and the first question they asked me was, "Are you abused at home?" I thought it was kind of a funny question, but when you think about it, it's not.
Right. Yeah. And, there's a lot of different reasons why, typically a parent would abuse a kid. There's a lot of different reasons why kids would do that towards their parents. And it's not just bad parenting. Trauma happens all over. There's different reasons for that. And, I think it's safe to say that we could talk a little bit about it here. If we wanted to go deeper with it, we obviously could. But, if you're struggling in an abusive relationship, either as a parent or as a child or as a spouse, any way that you're being abused, abuse is not normal. It's not good. It's not healthy. And you need to seek some help. I think just go ahead and say that as a blanket statement and make sure that, if there's something that Lou or I could do, you certainly reach out and we would do our best to help you.
Yes. We talk about abuse. There's also a very, very close relative to abuse, and that's neglect.
Yeah.
What neglect? If you're neglected by your parents when you're a child, it's the same thing as abandonment. It leaves you with the feeling that you're not really worth much.
Right.
So, you weren't worth enough for me to spend time to feed you and take care of you. It's just very, very difficult to bring up a child properly. And we just don't know how to do it.
Right.
That's really the bottom line.
It'd be nice if there was a manual. Just
a manual?
A manual. You get a kid, you get the manual. Here's the operating manual for your brand new baby boy or brand new baby girl. But it's just not that way. And there's a lot of different, unfortunately, a lot of different people are affected in a myriad of ways because of neglect. And it has a tremendously negative ripple effect throughout not only the person that was neglected, the people that they come in contact with. And, if you're someone who was abused or neglected as a child and then you grow up and you have a child and you haven't come to grips with the abuse or neglect, that terrifies me, as being someone who may be having children. I want to make sure that I've gotten all of my issues dealt with as much as I can before I start having kids, because I'm afraid of what I might accidentally pass down to my kids.
Well, you mentioned a manual. I happen to be working on such a manual right now.
See what I did there? See what I did?
Yes. So that's nice. I'm like that tie-in. Yeah. I am in the process of writing a book about parenting. It's from kind of a different perspective, but hopefully it'll be out relatively soon before maybe the end of this year.
Right.
And that's what we're shooting for.
Yeah.
We do mention one thing, John. You're mentioning situations that cause trauma. And trauma is something that occurs even from small things that may happen to a child,
right,
or a man or a person or a woman or whoever. You could have been exposed to that. In other words, if you come from an abusive family and your mother was being beaten by your father, or he was an alcoholic, or you might have experienced the trauma yourself. You might have been hurt yourself, from someone who was drinking too much or just was very, very angry. And you could have been affected by that. So in those cases, you would be a victim of traumatic past exposure or experience.
Right. And those are legitimate. There's some people that don't believe that if things happen to people that it should affect them. Just, suck it up and deal, so to speak. But that's legitimate. You can actually have, trauma from going through an experience. And, I look at my friends who have gone off to, Gulf War I is my age. So I've had friends who had to go off and fight, and a couple of them did not come back the same. I had an uncle that was in Vietnam. He had a horrible experience, and he did not come back the same. So those traumatic effects, I've seen borne out in people in my life. So yes, they were victims of traumatic experiences.
Yeah, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Exactly.
You just defined it. Yeah.
Yep. Exactly. So
now, I want to just say something. Because we're talking about not being a victim and taking control of your life, I don't want anybody to think that if you've had any of these circumstances occur, that we're by any means minimizing it.
Right.
We know the trauma that it's put you through. So there's going to be more content later in this broadcast that talks to that and how we move past it, I guess is the best way to put it.
Right. So we've kind of defined what being a victim is, how you can be a victim of different things. Let's take a look at how being a victim impacts the lives of people in general. So let's say you have somebody that's been the product of a bad parenting experience when they were kids. What are some of the ways that is borne out in their lives especially with the people around them?
Well, I can tell you from my practice that I see a lot of people who are victims of bad parenting or abusive or negligent circumstances. And they all have very low self-esteem.
Right.
They have very low self-confidence, and they try to overcompensate for that. And that's how you see them when they manifest themselves in real life.
Right.
If you've ever had a friend, excuse me, or an acquaintance that always drains you, you might love them, they might be great folks, but whenever you're with them, they're constantly draining you. And what they're draining from you is energy. They need to be validated all the time. And that's kind of what this does to you.
Right. So those, the people that are around you, you're draining to them. What about people who are constantly needing, I know that it's kind of the same thing, but people who are victims to me, legitimate and maybe not so, which we'll get into that in a little bit. They're just, they're constantly in need of something.
Well, that's the problem they're left with, because they have no self-esteem. They have no self-worth or sense of correct self-worth. And they need that validation from somebody. And they'll get it from anybody that they can.
Right.
They're not real good folks to have a relationship with unless they get help. Right. Because in a marriage or in a relationship, romantic relationship, they're always taking. They want more and more and more. Well, do you think I look, am I handsome, or am I too fat, or am I too skinny, or any of those things? And it's like, okay, I got it.
Right.
I love you. You're great the way you are. And they don't listen to that.
Right.
So does that ring any bells there, John?
Yeah, it does. Who do I want to talk about first? No, I'm kidding. That's horrible. Yeah, and that's the thing, especially from let's just go back and talk about like a dating experience, not even talk about a marriage. If you've ever been in a relationship with someone who is constantly asking those questions, like Lou just said, or it's never enough. That's a horrible place to be in. It's very difficult, and the problem that you said, people tend to, if they are real victims, they tend to not want to necessarily seek help because we all like to do it on our own, or there's shame involved in it. And if you're have been abused, I sort of understand. I have no experience, like I can't talk about my own self, but that shame, I understand it, but you should try to seek some help with that, because I don't think you're going to be able to move on until you deal with it, and you can't be in a healthy relationship until you move past that.
Yeah, that's the truth, John. But there are people who consider themselves to be victims that may not necessarily really be a victim. And we're going to, as I said, we're going to get into this a little later on. But some of the things that you can see their lives being impacted, or your life being impacted by them, is that they always have a reason for why they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, or that's destructive. And that impacts everybody's life. It stops them from being productive. You don't get anywhere. So that's the idea behind the victimization. Now, how do we know if we're victims? Do you consider yourself to be a victim?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anybody who wants to answer.
Well, therein lies the rub. I think it's funny people who are legitimately victims of some horrible circumstance don't necessarily think of themselves that way. People who are not necessarily legitimately victims try to portray themselves in that way. You know,
I get it.
You know, to get what they need. You know, they're portraying themselves as victims. You know, at some point we need to figure out if there's like some way to tell, maybe some type of a checklist that we can go down and confirm that. But, you know, I think that, you know, if you consider yourself a victim, you'd have to ask yourself why. And if you do consider yourself a victim, what are you doing to get through that? Are you seeking some type of maybe professional help or at least some advice from some people? Are you actively working on getting through that? That would be my first question.
And how did you get victimized?
Right.
What happened? You know, supposedly we're all born naked and with pretty much the same set of everything that everybody else has. So why is it that you in particular are a victim?
Right.
Well, there's a lot of reasons that it could be very valid, and there's reasons that, well, not so much. So we really need to look at this and how, if you are considering yourself to be a victim, how has it impacted you specifically?
Right.
What's happened in your life, and what are you doing in your life that impacts the world and from your perspective that does things to you? Is it that you always get put at the end of the line? Is it whenever you go into a checkout line to buy your groceries, somebody cuts in front of you, and then, you know, and you're always having these types of things happen to you?
Right. Is it when people make comments that are not personal, you always take them personally for some reason? You know, that's right. You know, there's never enough compliments to make up for one negative.
Right.
You know,
and those people never get enough of that stuff. They never do.
Right. One of the things that we did when we were preparing for this is we put together a checklist. I mentioned a checklist earlier to determine whether you think that you are a victim. And again, this is not going to be maybe specific to everybody, but we wanted to talk in general terms. Again, I don't think that we're going to solve all the world's problems, but if you feel like you have been a victim, or if you feel like that there's something you need to talk about, Lou and I are always available to talk at a deeper level, but we're trying to keep it kind of at a 36,000 feet view of victimization. So the first question is amazing. I love it. You have to ask yourself, if you think you're a victim, do I always have an excuse for my failures? So do I always have an excuse for when things go wrong? Go ahead.
No, I said, yeah, you're right. The whole concept of I'm always failing, but it's never my fault, you know?
Right.
I got bad grades, and it was because the lighting in the room was just awful.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
Are you doing that? Seriously, think about it for a while before you answer that.
Right.
Are you doing that?
Right. It's like when you're a little kid and, you know, you're trying to open up the 2-liter of Coke and you spill it all over the place. And then your mom walks in and says, why'd you spill that all over the floor? And then you look at your baby sister and say, well, she bumped my arm and I couldn't help it. You know, you screwed up. You made a mess, and you're trying to blame somebody else, or you're trying to find some other reason, some extenuating circumstance to why you failed.
The next thing on the list is, do I blame others for my misfortune? It's always somebody else's fault.
That's right.
I didn't get the other man in the moon. I didn't get that promotion I wanted to. Why is it?
Right.
Well, it's because Joey is, he's real good friends with the supervisor, and he got it in and I didn't.
Right. Well, the boss had it out for me.
Yeah, boss had it out.
Yeah. You know, in a relationship, in a marriage relationship, I see this a lot. When one spouse makes a mistake, and then the other spouse catches them or calls them on it, and then it becomes this, well, you've done this. Why is it not fair for me to do it, but you do it? Or you said this before, so why can't I say it? And then every action gets predicated on actions from the other spouse.
Well, we got a comment here that in some cases it is other people's fault.
That's true.
Yes, you're right. It is in some cases. But you know what? Sometimes these things happen to us, and we're not going to base our entire career on whether or not somebody has done something that made it impossible for me to move ahead in my job or in my life. Blaming others, even if they are guilty, okay, doesn't do any good. Because then what does it do? It makes you a victim.
True.
Right?
But I think it's fair to say that, if you're in a healthy frame of mind, assuming you're in a healthy, happy place, or at least a decent place, if somebody calls you on a mistake or if you screw up, my first, and I'm not saying that I'm perfect, I am far from perfect, but if I screw up, usually my first go-to is I own up to it, because I've done enough of the lying and the making excuses for everybody watching and most of the internet. So I try to own up to it. And that if that's not your first go-to response, that's a problem. That's kind of what we're talking about. If I submit if I submit something to my boss and he doesn't like it, and a buddy of mine submits one and he likes his, that's not my fault. That's my boss is like the other person's proposal. That's the truth. So that's not necessarily blaming somebody or finding an excuse. That's the truth. Hey, I did my best, but it wasn't what the boss wanted.
Well, here's another one, John, and this one is a little bit more serious. Is, do I rationalize my bad behavior in order to justify that behavior?
Yeah, that's huge.
Try that one on for a little bit. I rationalize my bad behavior.
You don't understand. I talk to you in an abusive manner because that's just how my family is.
That's right. You were brought up that way.
You just don't understand. That's just how we are. You just have to deal with it. Let's see. I've got many examples. I'm trying not to out friends of mine.
Just don't use any names.
Yeah. Yeah, you when you mess up, you just become this defense attorney. The other day, blah, 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 and this and that and the other. And by the time you're done, I don't even remember what the problem was, because you keep rationalizing all of your behavior. Look, if the pizza's there and you ordered it and you drank a gallon of Coke, you are going to be overweight. It wasn't the Coke's fault. It wasn't the pizza's fault. It wasn't the delivery man's fault. You ate the pizza. It's your fault. There's no way around it.
But there's other ones that are bad too. I mean, we could say that, look, I was born in poverty, and I really never had anything.
Right.
So you know what? This whole world owes me something. So I'm not going to work, or I'm going to work as little as possible, or I'm going to do something illegal so that I can get the money that I want.
Right.
And you justify it by saying, look, isn't my fault. I worked hard, but I really can't get anywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, we can go down a lot of different roads. There's bad behavior that happens that I just sit and shake my head at, and it's justified off because, well, I didn't have this growing up, or I didn't have both parents, or this or that and the other. And it's just excuses, and you just rationalize it away. And at the end of the day, you are solely responsible for the actions that you take and the words that you speak.
Yes, you are.
Nobody is making you say things, and nobody is making you do things. You always have a choice. Sometimes those choices are difficult. I understand that, but you always have a choice. And that's one of the things I think that you've taught me. No matter what, you always have a choice.
That's right. No matter what the circumstances, there's always a choice. but you do have to get and experience the consequences of that choice.
Right.
And that's the way the world works.
Right.
And a lot of times we can be really, really good critics of other people.
Yes.
It's a hazard in my profession, because here I am listening to people, and I've been doing this for 15 years. So I kind of get the idea after the first few minutes when someone's in my office, and I can see the negative traits. But one thing I had to do in order to live with myself and be able to go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning and look at what I see in the mirror is I understand that I see some of those traits in myself. So what gives me the right to judge anybody?
Right.
And that's the way you have to deal with these things. Because if you do take on the victim persona, then you'll always see other people's negative traits, and you'll never see them in yourself. It's everybody else, not me.
Right. Well, I had a old timey pastor when I was younger who would talk about when you look at other people's problems and you start pointing out all of their mistakes and all of their problems, that when you point, you usually have a few fingers that are pointing back at you. Just being completely honest, completely real, completely transparent is, back in the day, I would say whatever I had to get out of a situation. I was not one to always be, I had a lying problem. I lied my way out of a lot of stuff. And it was really, really easy for me when I felt like somebody was lying to me. I just look them in the eyes and go, "You're lying to me." And I would catch them 99% of the time. And I think it's as you start working on these negative traits, you see it so quickly in other people. But I would defend somebody to the death that they were saying that I was a liar. I would argue it, but I was a lot of times I was saying a lot of stuff just to get out of trouble.
That's very brave, man, to admit that. It's difficult to admit it too.
Right.
But you feel better for it.
Yeah, it doesn't make it easy. And I think that goes back to what you said about consequences. The reality of everything that we're talking about today is, you have to come to grips with what happened. If something happened to you, my heart goes out to you. If you were abused, if you were, you were not treated well, if you were neglected, if you had some circumstance completely out of your control that caused you to have to make a horrible decision, or your life has been affected in a negative way. Lou and I both, I'm speaking for you and I apologize, but we both feel for you. Those situations are horrible. But the thing is, no matter how bad the situation is, at some point you have to move beyond it and get healthy and start making better and healthier decisions. The thing is, if you were like me back in the day and you have this bad habit of lying or whatever behavior that you're exhibiting and you're blaming it on, this trauma that's happened to you, eventually you're going to have those consequences. And those are not easy to deal with. And then once you get past it, if you were like me and you get past it and you start making better life choices, the consequences don't necessarily become easier, because I have to tell the truth all the time. And it's not always easy. But like you said, you feel better. And I can sleep at night knowing that I haven't lied to anybody.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, let's answer the question. How do I take control of my life and stop letting the victimization control me? Take control of your life.
Right. I'll go ahead and do this for you.
Go right ahead.
If you've been abused, no matter if it's verbal or physical or mental or whatever way that you've been abused, or you've had some trauma in your life, our biggest number one suggestion is to seek some therapy. If you've not worked with a therapist to reconcile the trauma, that is the very, very first thing that you should do. If you don't have a therapist, if you don't have a counselor that you can talk to, they don't come any better than Lou. He is the best at what he does. And you can contact him directly at lifecarecounseling.net. You can shoot him an email. You can also shoot us an email at questions@reallifepodcast, and I will give that to him. and he will treat you with incredible amounts of respect. He'll treat you with confidence and make sure that everything that's said there is just between you and him, and he will help you get healthier. If you're not doing that, you're not going to be able to get past it as fast.
That's right. And getting past it, which is a real cliche term that we all use, but getting past it really is the key.
Right.
Because the longer that you let this trauma or this victimization grab hold of you and stay with you, the longer you're going to let that victimization continue. And I guess what I put in the notes was the longer you let the victimization run your life, the longer you'll remain a victim and not in control of your life. It's easier said than done. And believe me, I'm not trying to minimize anybody's situation. But I see very serious ones, and I see very frivolous ones, quite honestly. And you have to use the discernment that you were given in order to tell the difference between the two.
Right.
Right?
Right. Now, the next thing that we would like to encourage you is if you've been victimized by a circumstance, maybe bad parenting or been exposed to trauma, therapy obviously would be our first suggestion. That may be the answer. Or if it's not as serious, maybe it's something that you can deal with the support of trusted friends, or maybe you can find a support group. There's lots of support groups maybe in your community. Maybe you attend a religious organization that has some support groups within there. There's a lot of different ways that you can find help, but it's going to require you to actively seek that out.
These are the serious things, and these are the things that are real life circumstances.
Right. And
the first thing you need to remember is that I have not met a person, including myself, that didn't have junk bothering them, that didn't have some kind of a circumstance in their lives or some kind of trauma or some kind of lousy parenting or something that they needed to, they all need it. They all need help. And things like money, things like a lot of friends, they're good, but they don't fix the problem. There are people who have never experienced a situation like the more serious ones we listed earlier, bad parenting, those types of things. But you still believe you're a victim, and you act as if you are a victim. Maybe the problem isn't the victimization in those circumstances. Maybe you don't look at yourself as a worthwhile and productive person. Maybe you make a lot of mistakes and you're just afraid to admit them. In either case, or in any case, if you feel that you're a victim, we need to take a look at what's going on with you and how your relationships are and what your life is like. Because whether or not you are a real victim or not, if you feel you are, then we have to address it, valid or not.
Yeah, and you also have to be prepared for if it's not valid.
Right.
Just have to be aware. Maybe you think you are, maybe you're really not, or maybe it's just easier to portray yourself that way. And I've had a lot of experience with people who are that way. It's just they've figured out how to game the system, and the problem with those people is they take a lot of energy and resources away from people who really need it. But, they just figured out a way to get a little leg up on people because they play to our sensitivities and our good nature. That sound about right?
It sounds about right.
Right.
But in any of those circumstances, intervention is needed, which means you need to go seek help.
Right.
Because it may not be real to 99% of the world, but it may be real to you.
Correct.
And if it is, we need to fix. We need to help.
Right. Absolutely. All right, my friend, is there anything else that we need to add about this? Obviously, we could talk about this for a whole lot longer, but we wanted to keep the time short. How to stop being a victim and take control of your life. That's what it is. You have to take control. But it takes a lot of work. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, my friend?
No, it's just don't be afraid to go seek help.
Right.
Mental health isn't a boogeyman anymore. It used to be many, many years ago.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that you're crazy. It doesn't mean that there's something defective in you. It just means that you've got something bothering you and you're smart enough to take the step to get it fixed.
Right. Absolutely. One great way that you can take a step that is really easy is to connect with us at thereallifepodcast.com. You can send us an email at questions@reallifepodcast.com. You can contact us over there as well. There's links to Lou at Life Care Counseling and me at johncdonahue.com. We also can find us over at you can also find us over at Facebook at the Real Life Podcast, or on Twitter at Real Life Cast. We'd love to talk to you there. We want to encourage you to choose to be awesome, because when you choose to be awesome each day, you truly will be. So we can't wait to see you next week. Thanks a lot for listening, and have a great day, everybody.
Thank you for listening to the Real Life Podcast. Find out more information and sign up for the Real Life Podcast newsletter at reallifepodcast.com. You can also learn more about our hosts, Lou Carfisi at lifecarecounseling.net and John Donahue at johncdonahue.com. And remember, live your life to the fullest. And as always, we want to encourage you to choose to be awesome, because when you choose to be awesome, you will be. Have a great week, everyone.